Name is Mel Slater. I'm currently an ICREA professor located at Universidad Politécnica de Catalunya, and also I have a part-time professorship in the Department of Computer Science, University College London. My background is in computer science. I started in the early 1980s studying and researching and teaching in computer graphics. That led me on to 3D computer graphics and interaction by the late 1980s. Then in 1990 or so, I got involved in virtual reality research, and since then that's mainly what I've been doing. Currently, my main research revolves around a project that I lead called Presencia, which is an integrated project funded by the European Union, and this project studies various aspects of presence, ranging from the neuroscience point of view in trying to understand how presence works, and through to the computer science point of view, which is more technical work and engineering. So in my lab, we do research on both parts. We carry out technical work to build virtual environments, and also we evaluate them through experiments. My definition of presence as a phenomenon is that when you go into an artificially created simulation, in particular when that the aspect of presence I'm interested in is when that simulation is done through digital means, what we would call virtual reality or mixed reality, that the person experiencing that takes it as real. Not that they believe that it's real, but they respond as if it's real. So that this means that when events happen, they respond to those. They almost can't help but respond to those events as if they were really happening, rather than being something which is just a game or just virtual. So presence, as the way I approach presence, is to look at what people do, what they say, what they tell me they think, and relate that to how they would have responded had the events themselves been real. And presence as a field is two aspects of it. If you like, the scientific side is understanding why this happens or why it doesn't happen, what the conditions under which this phenomenon occurs, and also engineering, using that scientific knowledge to engineer virtual reality and mixed reality to maximize the chance that it would happen. Yeah, there's absolutely a need for focus. When this field started within virtual reality, it actually was inherited from another field called teleoperator systems. And in a teleoperator system, you basically place yourself in a robot. You place yourself in a system where you see through the eyes of a robot and you manipulate the limbs of a robot, which is in some remote place. Theoretically, for example, the robot could be on the moon, picking up and looking at moon rocks while you're on Earth, having the sensation that it's you doing that. And so these scientists who studied this and engineered it, they talked about the idea of being there, which is being in that remote place where the robot is, rather than being in the lab or wherever it was that you were. And so this same idea was inherited by virtual reality, because in virtual reality, you know, of course, you're standing in a real physical lab in a real place, and you're interacting inside a virtual world instead of a real physically remote world. So, but essentially, conceptually, they're the same thing. So in the 1990s, when this field started, everyone had a very clear idea of what they meant by presence, which was this transfer of the sense of place to the virtual. If you asked, where are you now, you would say, mention aspects of the virtual place. Since that time, and especially in the last few years, the term has become very diluted to mean anything like the sense of involvement with an environment, the sense of engagement, extending it from virtual reality to even some people saying the sense of presence when looking at a mobile phone display, this kind of thing. And I think all these things are very interesting to study, but when you have such a diverse definition in such a diverse realm of application, you can't make any scientific progress. So my belief is to narrow the field to considering presence in relation to digitally generated virtual environments, and using a definition like the one I said, which is how people respond, which you can actually get at scientifically rather than this kind of vague sense of being there, which you can't really get at scientifically. So yeah, the field needs further focus than it has at the moment. In fact, so much so that I'm almost at the point of stopping using the word presence and using another term which I coined 2 or 3 years ago called pretense. Pretense, like pretense, in a sense, when you're in a simulated environment. It's like kids playing in a way. If you remember being a child and being really involved in some game that you were playing with other children, that's an example of pretending, but it's also an example of presence, but it's just not in a digital environment. But probably many of the same things come to play. So to differentiate the kind of thing that I mean from what many people are meaning, this very vague term, maybe it's time to move on and use another term. It's both. There's the scientific side, which is to understand why it happens, and then there's the technological side, which is based on that understanding, trying to reproduce circumstances when it has a high chance of occurring. Amongst the other sciences, obviously it's very related to perceptual psychology and neuroscience and cognitive psychology. Well, let's just say psychology and neuroscience. It's, if you like, a subdiscipline of those. It's also related to the study of consciousness, which is part of also of neuroscience and psychology. And on the technical side, I wouldn't say it's part of virtual reality technical research, but it gives virtual reality technical research an orientation, which means that the goal of such research is to produce presence. So, for example, it's why in my lab, whenever we develop a new algorithm or a new technique in computer graphics, we don't just say, aha, okay, we've invented a new technique in computer graphics and publish that. We always evaluate its impact on presence. So it gives us a focus for our research. So it's both scientific and technical. It came from some very interesting personal experiences I had when I first encountered virtual reality. And this was, I think, in 1990 at a SIGGRAPH conference in the United States. And I was invited to put on a head-mounted display by, I think at that time, the only company who were producing them. And the experience I had of putting on the head-mounted display, being very disappointed, first of all, just to see some fat pixels. And then when I moved my head, suddenly I was in a different place, and a very profound experience that ever since I've been trying to understand. How does this work? How can we make it better? What technology is needed to produce it? What's the scientific explanation, and so on. So I was anyway working in the area of 3D computer graphics, so I shifted very slightly away from simply concentrating on algorithms and user interfaces to saying, okay, it's now, yeah, computer graphics algorithms, but the only user interface I'm really interested in is the immersive one, the virtual reality one. There are several reasons. One is that I'm still haven't recovered from that first experience, although it was 17 years ago. It's still, in a sense, fresh in my mind. I've always been interested in things like dreams and stuff like that, and so it kind of relates to my personal interests. And it's great when you construct a virtual reality environment and you know, like for example, I know how it works because I know about programming and the technology side. And when I go in, even though I know how it works and it still affects me, this is very exciting. And it's also really exciting to see the responses of other people. So, I mean, can I give you an example? For example, right now we're running an experiment where I think probably for the first time in the world, you go into a virtual environment and it includes a mirror and shadows of yourself. This is in a cave system. So you're not wearing a head-mounted display, but you're in a room with 4 walls that are projected, back projected from projectors, and it's stereo 3D and your head tracked. And you look into the scene, and in the scene there's a mirror, and what do you see in the mirror? You see a reflection of your own virtual character. So as you move, it moves. As you turn your head, it turns your head. It turns its head, and so on. But not only that, as soon as you have a mirror in a virtual environment, you see what's going on behind you. So you're looking at the mirror and some event may happen behind you. So in this experiment, what happens behind you is suddenly another person, virtual person appears. And to me, it's really exciting to see everyone suddenly turn around to look, who's come in? Because they see that person in the mirror. So I still get a big thrill from seeing the effects of these environments on people. It's not always such fun, because at the end of the day, I mean, it's fun to do the programming and do the experiments and so on, but there's another side of it, because you end up with a lot of data that you then have to spend sometimes days or weeks analyzing, and sometimes that's not so much fun. But what kind of applications? Well, given the definition that I work from, which is that people respond to it as if it's real, then any aspect where you want to use virtual reality for training, for example, training something to do in virtual reality which they're later going to do in real life. And it's better to train in virtual reality because doing it in real life is too dangerous or impractical or unethical or something like that. Then that's a really major application. Another example of that, doesn't seem like training, but in a way it is psychotherapy. So if somebody has a very great fear of walking across a bridge, if you can get them to walk across a virtual bridge and they start to have similar anxieties that they do in reality, then that can be used by psychotherapists in helping people to overcome their problems. As an example of that, we work with people in the Institute of Psychiatry in London who study paranoia. And what we've observed is that when people interact with virtual characters, they exhibit the same kind of tendencies as people do in everyday life. So you look at someone at that precise moment by accident, they just happen to look away, and some people will make a story in their head, oh, whenever I look at that person, they look away, so they don't like me. And we observed over many years that people do the same in virtual reality. They happen to look in a certain direction, and a virtual character smiles at them, and they think, this one likes me. So we were telling this to a psychiatry professor at UCL in London, and he said, let's use this as a lab for studying paranoia. And that's been really successful with a lot of funding put into it by research agencies. An application for myself, yeah, that's easy. I spend a lot of time going to meetings and traveling. I'd much rather send my virtual character to go to the meetings instead, and I just stay at home relaxing or reading books on presents or writing books on presents. Yeah, there's ethical issues, but they're the same as in many realms. Obviously, if you can create an environment in which people respond as if it's real, you can use that to cure a phobia, or you can use that to give somebody a phobia. So I think it's very important that people who work in this field, when they do work with people, experiments or systems for people, that those have appropriate ethical control. There's many. I think the biggest, presence requires multimodal sensory generation from a computer. So the visual side is pretty okay. We can do quite realistic looking virtual environments as realistic as we want, in a sense. The sound side is okay. It's possible to generate sound coming from any direction, and it can be extremely realistic. It just depends how much resource you want to put into it, but the technology is there. But with the other side, which is feeling, touch, and force feedback, so the general field called haptics, no matter how much money you spend on that, there's still no real solution which is practical today. So as an example, if I walk through a virtual environment and my elbow happens to brush against a virtual object, I'm not going to feel anything. So I think this is the biggest technical bottleneck that there is today. Not really, because every experiment I've wanted to do so far I've done or am doing. What's difficult, though, is sometimes the amount of time it takes to do it. So, for example, the one we're doing now, which is on the virtual fire, probably there were, 10 person years went into that, and a cost of maybe 250,000 euros if I had everything up together of what's gone into that, because getting all these different systems to work together, the visual displays, of which there are several, even if you just use a head-mounted display, you're still talking about 2 different displays, one for the left eye, one for the right eye. In a cave, there's 4 different display processes that have to go on. There's the tracking, we usually take physiological measures of people during these things. There's the creation of the environment, and if you have virtual characters in that environment, they've got to look right and move right, and all of this is a huge, huge amount of time. Not only that, but there's no standards, which means that if we create an application here in Barcelona and we want to go and run it on some machine in Germany, probably we can't do it without 6 months more work. So there's no standards in this field. So doing everything is really tedious, so in terms of time and in terms of money. In fact, at this conference, there's going to be a talk about how we made the experiment on the fire, explaining some of these issues. But basically, the problem is one of the length of time it takes to get everything together. So it's an area of research that requires a lot of equipment and a lot of dedicated people in order to produce the environments. No, I don't think it's changed the meaning of reality, but it may bring home to people how much our own reality is fake or is inside our head. So, for example, when we were doing our first experiments on paranoia, it's very simple. People, and these were ordinary people, they weren't people with psychotic paranoia, they just had a range of paranoia that exists in the population. So they went into the virtual environment, which was just a library, and a few virtual characters looked at them, that was it. And the stories they came out telling us were incredible, like people were talking about them behind their back, and people were looking at them in a funny way. People were friendly or unfriendly, but none of this was really going on. I mean, we know it wasn't going on because we programmed it. So it made me realize, which theoretically I already know, but it made me realize how much of, in everyday reality, most of what we think is going on is coming from inside our own heads. Yeah, of course you get cues from the real world, but so much of what we think is going on is an invention from our brain based on our own past history and the way we selectively look around the world, the way we selectively hear things, the way we interpret things. So presence won't change reality, but it might make us understand more that there is no reality. The reality is, there is reality, but what we perceive is largely coming from inside ourselves. Not really, because I started from a pretty crazy point of view anyway. As I said before, I've always been interested in dreams and things like out-of-the-body experiences and stuff like that, which is now coming back into science, even in the realm of virtual reality. So I'm very happy that some of my interests and my research are somehow accidentally, or not accidentally, somehow surprisingly coming together. So no, it hasn't changed my view of reality. Maybe it's emphasized some aspects of it, but it hasn't changed my view, no. In just one question, yeah, why does presence occur? How does presence occur? How is it that people in a virtual reality which they know not to be real, nevertheless tend to respond as if it is? How does this happen, and how can we make it even stronger?